Welcome to the Movement Upgraded podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jen Hostler, licensed physical therapist and certified strength and mobility coach. Here you can expect to hear about all things movement. The Movement Upgraded podcast is a blend of the science of strength training, rehab, and mobility, mixed with the personal and professional experience to provide you with the steps you need to keep your body pain-free and moving well, so you can do what you love forever. Hello, and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about DOMS, or also known as delayed onset muscle soreness. I recently got back into lifting after a time period of low-level lifting. We were traveling, and I went back to heavier lifting, and holy DOMS, I could not move. I was waddling, and I was talking to Ryan about how often people chase muscle soreness and how much nowadays, because I used to as well, I thought that was this sign of the workout working, right? Doing what it needs to. That was my sign that we were doing what we needed to, because I didn't know enough. And nowadays, after being in the fitness industry and being super consistent with lifting for quite some time, it is something I try to avoid at all costs. And that journey is something that I try to help most of my clients kind of go down and try to help them see the light, I guess, for lack of better words. And so because of that, I thought it might be good to record a podcast episode about DOMS and what it is and why we don't necessarily want to chase it in our workouts. And I'd like to help you kind of reach that conclusion as well through this podcast. I also want to talk about what DOMS is and some of the mechanisms behind what's at play. And I think this is very fascinating. And I wanted to bring this up also because a lot of what we used to think, or we used to theorize behind delayed onset muscle soreness, is not true. And talking to Ryan about that, he was like, wow, yeah, that's so interesting, because even in chiropractic school, I was taught the old theory behind it, even though that was something that was perpetuated in the 80s and 90s. So I think I've said this before in this podcast, but science never really proves anything. We just get more and more knowledge, and we get more confident in our recommendations and things like that. And so there is this tendency to think that all is lost, throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to cling to what's right and be okay, this is the answer, and then move on with our lives, right? That's doing the bare minimum work. That's our brains wanting to not have to work hard to think about something. And the hard part is we aren't very certain about most things, and that's kind of a hard thing to grasp and swallow, but it's really just means that we're on a journey of lifelong learning. And when we are presented with new information, it's really important we change our minds. I know I've said that quite a bit lately, but I just wish that we could do that more often and be okay with us not knowing as much as we would like to know, or being as confident. We can be pretty confident in our recommendations in science, as far as what we know at that time, but that can change. So that doesn't mean that we were wrong in the past. That was still the best recommendation at the time. So keep that in mind as we move forward. So let's talk about DOMS. What the heck are they? So delayed onset muscle soreness is that sensation, usually 12 to 24 hours, but some people, like Ryan, don't experience it for 2 days later. I'm the immediate next day. Sometimes if I work out in the morning, by the end of the day, I'll have DOMS already. But it is the sensation, or the stiffness and achiness of, wow, I worked out really hard. And it is pain. It's painful, and it makes us not want to move very much. So when we are first getting into fitness, this is usually one of those, yeah, I worked really hard, I did it. It's this immediate dopamine hit. I don't even know if dopamine is the right word, but it's this immediate I did something. It's a reward for our hard work. It helps us feel like we did something. And that, unfortunately, is something that we then assume is necessary to achieve results. Always, right? But most of the time, DOMS happens only when we are doing something new. And I'm going to talk about that and kind of what it means and what's happening with DOMS. But it's only like a novel stimulus and doing something new, pushing the intensity, whatever. And so that means we would constantly, to try to chase DOMs, would have to be doing something new and pushing our limits. And if you know anything and have listened to any of my podcasts or kind of followed some smarter fitness professionals content, you'll know that that's not what we want to do in fitness. We don't want to be constantly pushing and constantly changing our workouts. So DOMS is not something we want to chase. And we're going to talk about that today. And I'm going to give you a couple reasons, like my big 2 reasons of why we don't want to chase it. The first reason is going to be what it means. So the reason we don't want to chase it is because of like what we would have to do or what it can mean if we're constantly having DOMS. It's actually not a good thing. And then the second reason is going to be the result, or what happens when we do have a lot of DOMS. And both of those are going to be reasons you don't want to experience or chase DOMS 24/7. So DOMS is essentially that pain and stiffness that happens when we do something really heavy, really hard, or just something new if we haven't done it for a while. It's like a new exposure. And the way that I like to explain it to people is basically our body saying, hey, I need to recover, chill out a bit with the load, right? And if you're just getting back into exercise, is kind of one of those, yes, thank you, body, for letting me know. I am well aware. We're going to slowly introduce load over time. I'm going to make sure we have lots of recovery. So it's important to pay attention to that. But what we used to think DOMS meant is the buildup of lactic acid. That was what I was taught in my exercise science degree, even back in like 2010, I believe. 2012 was when I was in exercise science. So 10 years ago, we were still kind of perpetuating this idea. But right around then was when I started reading more information about how that's not actually true. We don't know exactly what causes it, but we do have a few other theories. And we know it has more to do with the micro damage to the muscles and inflammation that happens as a byproduct. So when we are lifting heavy, for example, or we do anything that is strenuous to our muscles, we are actually breaking them down. We are kind of creating these micro tears, and that produces some inflammation, just like any other injury, right? It's kind of like micro damage. And then our body goes in and repairs those. But it's like, well, crap, if this destroyed us, we got to be stronger for the next time that this force happens or we have to do these things. So it rebuilds your muscles a little bit stronger. And that's like a very simplified version, but it's enough for you to understand what's happening. And so the micro damage and inflammation can trigger some pain and painful sensations. But some other things that are happening and some other theories that are now being looked at are how our body kind of creates pain in general. And it has to do with our nociceptors and what we call neuromodulation. So I've talked about this before, but the pain threshold is how much we can tolerate, whether that is pressure or load or something, or temperature even. That's what triggers these nociceptors, and we can only tolerate so much before our body's like, hold on, this could become damaging, so it alerts us of pain. And we've talked about how that kind of those nociceptors can be modulated based off of stress and all kinds of things, and inflammation can even trigger them. And we're now looking at exercise as just a new stimulus that our body then goes into kind of like an overprotective mode and is like, hey, maybe don't do this too much, or it's a way for our body to kind of protect us, right? And so our DOMS is actually very similar to that sensation, is very similar to all of the pain sensations that we actually experience. So that's actually kind of cool, because that gives us some really good information on how pain is very protective. And I think it's really interesting to constantly chase this idea of pain, if we really think about it. And I think part of the reason is, like I said before, we get this immediate reward for our workout, so it makes us feel like we did something. And the way to make sure that you are not doing that, or so you feel like you are doing something, is to understand what's actually happening. So hopefully this podcast can help. And then also to know what are signs of progress, or ways that you did something. And sometimes just knowing that your program and trusting your program, because one, you either hired somebody who's a professional to write it for you, or two, you know yourself because you've done research and you understand all of these mechanisms. You know what's happening, and you know that if you show up, and sometimes this is just experience, by the way, it's just knowing that you show up, you don't feel destroyed, you don't feel sore, but you're still making progress. Sometimes that's like you have to go through a bout of like 10 to 12 weeks in a program and not experience muscle soreness and DOMS 24/7 and then see results for you to realize, oh, okay, so just checking the box off actually is all I need to do. I don't need to feel destroyed. And I really, really want us to understand that, because when we start to chase DOMs, we start to put ourselves at risk for injuries and even things like red ass, which is something we don't want to deal with. So that is kind of the gist behind DOM. So lactic acid is not what's happening. That stuff clears really quickly within a couple hours of exercise. What DOMS really has to do with is micro damage, inflammation, and some neuromodulation of the nociceptors, or the receptors in our body that send signals that can get interpreted as pain in our brain. So all of that is what's happening. Why this happens, I kind of have hinted at this already, but this usually happens when you are experiencing or doing a spike in load. So if you were moving regularly, but you suddenly increased your load, and maybe last month you were doing more hypertrophy training, higher reps, and this month you go into lower reps, like under 6 to 8, anything under like 5, 4, 3 sets of those are going to be heavier, and that increase can trigger some DOMs, right? So that's an increase in load. Maybe you are doing the opposite. Maybe you are doing heavy strength and now you're going into high repetitions. That can trigger DOMs as well. It's just your body's not used to what you were doing, and DOMs is just your body going into an alarm state saying, hey, I'm not used to this. Hold on, let me recover. Like, it's just a warning sign. After the first week or two, you should not experience that, right? That should kind of calm down, because your body should adjust and accommodate to the load. That means that your body is now adapting as you want, right? The point in fitness is to stress your body to create adaptations that you want in the body. The body's not going to create those adaptations if it's constantly being alarmed. So that is the first reason. This kind of goes into the why DOMS is not the best, is because we want to make sure it's making adaptations. And if it's constantly in a state of alarm, it's not actually making those adaptations. It's telling you something's going on. So at first, it's okay, first week or two, but after that, we should not be experiencing DOMs. So that usually can happen. If you are going from like not lifting or not working out for quite some time, and all of a sudden you work out and you get back into your program, one, we always want to go back in slowly and like if you left off like a month ago doing like heavy sets of 2, we're not going to jump into heavy sets of 2 at the same weight again. That's going to be a huge shock for your body. I've talked about this several times. I may need to add like a very specific load management podcast episode to explain this a little bit more, but we want to make sure that we are slowly getting our body to adjust again, giving it 1 to 2 weeks of working back up to that heavy weight, because otherwise your body has not prepared, right? It's not fair to expect your body to accommodate a giant spike in load when it wasn't doing that the week or 2 prior, even if 3 months ago you were lifting pretty heavy. So imagine, this is me saying like a 3-month break. Imagine if you're somebody who hasn't worked out that heavy or even that much in decades, right? Sometimes people come into my office and they get injured after. When I will talk to them, first of all, they will be like, well, I was an athlete, and that's cool if you were an athlete in high school, but 18, the difference between 18 and 48 is quite significant. Your body is not the same body, and yes, some aspects of fitness are really never lost, and if you have achieved a certain level of fitness, it will usually not take as much effort to achieve that again, but it may take time. So usually it won't take as much, but the difference between 18 and 48 years is quite significant. So you can't expect yourself to go in and PR and do all these things. It's not fair to your body. And that's when we tend to get injured, because now we're dealing with a different body than we were at 18, and we don't recognize that, or we fail to recognize that, and we fail to come to terms with the fact that we are not the athlete we were at 18. And sometimes we have to do some mindset work on that when I talk to my clients, but that is very often what happens. So when we are jumping back into exercises again, 1 to 2 weeks is fine to have some of the DOMS sensation. Also, this is like side note from not working out, if you are going and doing some sort of movement. So if you go hike and all of a sudden your hike has a ton of downhill movement, that's a lot of eccentric load. Eccentric does tend to stimulate a lot of DOMs because that there's some theories behind that, but it does tend to trigger a little bit more micro damage, a little bit more of the DOM sensation. And so if you were doing that out of nowhere and it's not heavy loads, right? Like it doesn't feel like we have a bunch of load in our body, it's just our body weight, but we're going downhill. That's a lot. And we weren't used to that. We might be sore the next day. Another example might be a perfect example actually is when we just moved into our house. This was last April. And previously I had lived in an apartment. And in my apartment, we had rugs everywhere. I had carpet in the rooms. And if I was going outside of my apartment, I was pretty much wearing shoes because we were going for a walk. There's not a lot really to do in our apartment. And our apartment didn't have a lot of space to walk in. So, and then I think our flooring was like linoleum, so it was kind of soft. When we moved in here, there was tile everywhere. And it's like hard tile. And then we have a back area that's like screened in, a lanai, and that has like concrete, I don't know what that's called, but it's concrete all around the pool. And then we ripped out the carpet, and so we had concrete flooring for the first couple of weeks before we had carpet installed. And I was on my feet significantly more all day long because we were moving and I was trying to prepare things and we were just trying to get settled because I hate being unsettled and I'm trying to run a business and do all these things while we're trying to move. And so I noticed my feet were extra sore, like stiff and achy, just like I had done a hard workout. Well, as far as my feet are concerned, that's what I did because the amount of load going through them was a significant spike. They're used to a softer amount of cushion, and all of a sudden I don't have a soft cushion. And then also I'm just on them more and I'm doing more movement. So that is a spike in load, and that is when I experience some DOMs. And so what we can do with this knowledge is then take it and realize, okay, I need to be careful because if I don't listen, like to the DOMs, to the pain that my body's telling me, I can end up down a state that is not the best for my body, like injury. And those sensations that I was heading down towards would be something like plantar fasciitis. It's just a breakdown of those tissues too much and not enough time for them to repair. That's kind of what tends to happen with things like plantar fasciitis. And so I made an effort to put some shoes on and kind of tone down my walks for a week or two to give my body some time to adjust. And lo and behold, my feet were fine. I've never, knock on wood, that dealt with plantar fasciitis because my body has always told me a little warning of, hey, this doesn't feel good, right? That's what these pain signals are. They're not always super accurate, but when it comes to DOMs and we can directly tell in our lives the load that's happening, like the new workout or like the spike in load, then it's a great opportunity for us to either pull back or just pay attention and try not to add more load to allow our bodies to adjust. So that is typically why we will experience DOMs, right? Even just a spike in intensity. So if you're not used to jumping and you add some sort of jumping exercise, if you are not used to like sprinting and you're all of a sudden picking up pickleball and your feet are a little sore, those are normal for DOMs, right? Reasons in your fitness program that this could be perpetuated constantly. So those are like examples of in real world of what can happen with DOMs. Now let's move into if you're experiencing DOMs with your workouts super consistently, you're always sore, then this is one of the reasons that I really don't like chasing DOMs is because it can mean a handful of things. So if this is happening in your fitness program, it usually means number one, you're doing too much volume. So too much jumping, too many repetitions, too heavy of loads. After not doing enough, we kind of talked about that a little bit, or too many training days at a high intensity. So most load management or ideas behind making sure that we are giving our body enough time to recover and repair from the things that we're doing. It's a balance of stress and recovery, right? Exercise and recovery. And so doing too much means we need to recover really hard. Consequently, even if we don't feel like we're doing a ton, we might not be recovering very well. So that's the other half of this. And one of the other reasons you might have DOMs significantly, if you're not used to having so much soreness and muscle soreness, it can definitely be, even if you didn't change your volume, if all of a sudden you're more stressed out, if you are not eating enough calories, I know I've said this lots of times, but if you're not eating enough calories and specifically not enough protein, protein is what our body needs to repair all of the tissues that we are creating damage with. So if you're not eating enough protein, and I can almost guarantee that most people who are listening to this are not eating enough protein just because, well, maybe not, because I know my listeners are definitely more on the I've been in fitness for a while, or I like fitness, so you've probably heard this before, but most of the population aren't eating enough protein. So if you're not eating enough protein, that can just directly influence the DOMS. Like your body's just not recovering very well. Not sleeping enough can also be a lack of recovery, or just not giving your body enough recovery days. So that's the other thing. I usually, for most people, want 2 rest days, 2 complete rest days where the most you do is some gentle walking, maybe cars, maybe some light stretching or mobility work where you're at a low intensity, but like I don't want any significant movement that is stressing your body, to give your body some recovery time. And some people, if you have really high goals and you're not really pushing your limits all the time, you can get away with only 1 rest day, but honestly, you're still moving on your rest days, but most people really need the 2 rest days. And when we try to push it, it's really important that we stop if we're constantly sore or noticing something flaring up a lot. We want to pull back and kind of see what's going on. And most of the time, there's some urgency there. And it's really important to not be super urgent with our goals, right? I've talked about this before, but like the more that you can be patient and objectively listen to your body rather than be urgent and just push and not really hear what your body's telling you, the more successful you're going to be in general. So we really want to make sure that we are recovering enough and we are not doing too much. You can push your body pretty well as long as you're recovering for it. So remember, that's not to take this information and twist it into, oh, Dr. Jen said that I just need to rest more. Like, no, we still need to push our bodies. It's this fine, like, fun little dance of how much can I push my body, and because of how much am I recovering, and you really earn the intensity with your recovery. So that is the main first reason that I don't like chasing soreness all the time, because one, like we had said, what it means, it just means you're probably not recovering, or it's just because you did something new. And to constantly stimulate that muscle soreness, you're going to have to constantly do something new, and that typically will result in end up with a lack of results. Because if we really have a specific goal, so not just like general health and movement. If you're like, I want to squat deeper, I want to get stronger, I want to get a pull up, we have to follow a specific program. It's not just, you don't haphazardly achieve fitness goals unless you're starting at 0. If you're starting at 0, not really doing anything, doing almost anything is more than what you're doing. So you'll get some results, but at some point you have to be a little bit more specific with your training program. So we need to be doing very similar workouts. We need to be training, right? That's the difference. And I go back to my podcast episode where I talk about strength training and the difference between just working out and training. And check that out if you want to understand a little bit more. But if you are somebody who in your workout, you're just moving to move, but you're constantly feeling sore, that might be a sign that you need a little bit more training, or you need to pull back from the intensity of those workouts. Because yes, you're still doing something new all the time, but your body should have a generally higher capacity than what you are doing in your random movements, so that you're not constantly sore. The reason that we don't want to be constantly sore on top of that is number 2, the second thing that I wanted to bring up today, and that's because of what happens when we are sore. And it's painful. Like, it's not fun to be sore. As much as you tell yourself, like, I'm happy about this, like, it still sucks. Nobody likes pain. And you know what we do when we are in pain? We move less. We don't want to move. We feel stiff and achy. And guess what? If that happens day after day or week after week for months or even years, you're going to move less, and you're going to start having less movement options. Moving less movement options, less mobility equals less healthy joints, which eventually can become a problem that puts you at risk for injuries, or at the very bare minimum, it just doesn't feel very good. Your body starts to feel more stiff as you get older, and all of that can be combated with just not feeling stiffness and soreness all the time. I personally feel the best when I can move through a lot of range of motion and I'm not in a lot of pain. I don't need to add all this extra DOMS into my life. I don't enjoy pain. I don't think it's super helpful anymore. And if you're like, I'm right there, Jen, like I still really like the soreness, I hear you. If that's you, then we need to understand what other ways of progress that we can measure. Because if you're using the soreness as a measurement of I did the thing, I'm progressing, that's like your dopamine hit, which by the way, we need a dopamine hit to keep us consistent, right? Then we just need to talk about other ways to make sure that you feel like you're doing something. You need to understand what movement's doing for you. Read the book Spark. Like that was one of my favorite books ever. If you don't understand how much exercise, how much it benefits our brains, read that. It will tell you everything. It goes through so much information, and it's there's also some stories in there. It's not super duper heavy. It's a little heavier than like, your fiction books, but I really love that book. I think it's helpful in understanding what exercise is doing on a very general idea, like why the CDC is so high on, and everybody else, every fitness and health professional is like, exercise, workout, we need it. Like it's really helpful for us. So that is an example of how we can make that shift. So the second reason, just kind of, recapping here, that we don't want to constantly have DOMS is going to be because it makes us move less, and we don't want to move less. Our bodies need movement. And the more painful and stiff we feel, the less we move, and the more problematic that becomes over time. Because if you don't use it, you lose it. And if it's painful, you're not going to want to use it. And I usually recommend people don't push through pain, especially if it's closing angle stuff. Now, DOMS is questionable. I will have people push through like a little painful stretching if we know it's from like a workout of DOMS. So that is the only time I typically have people push through pain, and I don't have them push through high amounts of pain. And if it starts to get worse, we stop. But most of the time, if you feel like some stretching side, some like as you reach your arm overhead, your lats are stiff and sore, I will have people work through that a little bit because usually it feels better. But the goal is to not have to work through that, right? The goal is to control our loads, manage our recovery, manage our stress, sleep well, eat enough protein so that we can push our limits a little bit and make progress in our fitness goals without constantly being sore, so that it doesn't impact our lives. Because fitness is supposed to build you up, not tear you down. If it's getting to the point where it's impacting the rest of your life, then what are we really doing with fitness? It's supposed to make your life better, not take from your life. It's something I really think is important. I want your lifts to be challenging enough that you question your existence sometimes, but not so challenging that you feel like you got run over by a cement truck the following day and are always stiff and sore. And last but not least, like those are signs of overtraining and under recovering. If we're constantly chronically stiff and sore, we want to tone back. That's a sign that we've done too much. So that's hopefully everything that you wanted to know about DOMS, what it means really, what's happening with that, and then why we don't want to chase DOMS all the time. And like different reasons it can be happening. And again, if you feel like you're somebody who's like, well, I kind of like the DOMS, but I want to not like it as much, or I want to find something else that makes me feel, like rewarded or whatever, that is where we need to learn a little bit more or find a different thing that makes you feel like you achieved something that keeps you motivated, because DOMS can end up creating and perpetuating issues like an injury. So we can end up with things. I kind of gave a couple examples, but we really want to listen to our bodies and give our bodies what they need to get better rather than destroy them and break them down 24/7, which is something that I see a lot in fitness for a lot of different reasons. So hopefully that was helpful. If it was, please let me know. I love hearing from you. If you have any questions about anything, always you can reach out to me on Instagram or email at jen@movementupgraded.com. If you feel like somebody would really benefit from this information, please send it along to them. I'm so thankful when anybody recommends my podcast to anybody. And if you have not already, please go review the podcast, give it a 5-star, leave it a little bit of a review. It's so helpful and I appreciate it more than you'll ever know. I love reading those so much. So go do that. And I think from there, I will just talk to you on the next one.